What if I told you a retired engineer saved a billion-dollar warship from total failure using nothing but his instincts? How did he do it? Drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from, hit that like button if you're hooked, share this story with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Picture this. The most advanced warship in the fleet, the Raven Crest, a cutting-edge hybrid engine destroyer valued at over $1 billion, grinds to a complete halt in the middle of a high-risk mission. It should have been a seamless operation, a perfect example of naval supremacy. Instead, the Raven Crest, a marvel of engineering that integrates electric turbines, gas propulsion, and adaptive AI, suffers a catastrophic propulsion failure during a classified exercise off the coast of San Diego. The advanced propulsion system, a fusion of cutting-edge technology, suddenly goes silent. The ship's engines, which had been a source of national pride, cease to function, leaving the crew stranded in hostile waters. No alarms blare. No obvious faults appear on the diagnostic screens. And yet, the ship is paralyzed. Engineers and AI specialists, the brightest minds the Navy has to offer, rush to troubleshoot the issue, but nothing works. Their attempts to reboot the system are futile, as if the Raven Crest itself had decided to abandon the mission. The desperation in the air is palpable. The ship, known for its revolutionary hybrid propulsion system, is stranded, vulnerable to external threats. Every second counts, and with each passing minute, the sense of urgency grows. The crew's confidence quickly erodes as they run out of options. A $100 million AI system, meant to predict and solve every problem, is now an obstacle, feeding the engineers and officers confusing data that only deepens the crisis. The once sleek and powerful destroyer, which should have been the Navy's crowning achievement, is now just another machine waiting to be revived. With no clear solution in sight, Captain Douglas Bray, who had spent his career commanding some of the fleet's most sophisticated vessels, watches helplessly as his crew struggles. The weight of the situation presses down on him. Not only is the mission in jeopardy, but his career, his entire reputation, is hanging by a thread. He knows that the longer this issue drags on, the more severe the consequences will be for him and the Navy. Fear of failure begins to seep into the ranks, and morale begins to plummet. As hours stretch into an agonizing wait, Captain Bray knows he cannot afford to lose any more time. With no apparent solution from the top naval propulsion experts, he escalates the issue to Admiral Eleanor Pierce, the commanding officer who oversees the entire fleet. The stakes couldn't be higher. Failure here could have catastrophic consequences, both for the mission and for the Navy's standing in the global arena. This is where the crisis takes a dramatic turn. Instead of following the usual protocol and trusting the system to find an answer, Admiral Pierce makes a radical decision. She calls upon a retired Navy veteran, a man with a reputation for solving the unsolvable, someone who has a unique approach to problems that no AI or software could address. This decision, unorthodox as it may seem, might just be the last hope to save the Raven Crest from an embarrassing and dangerous failure. The fate of the ship rests in the hands of a man who hasn't touched a wrench in years, but whose intuition could make all the difference. The USS Raven Crest was a technological marvel. Its hybrid engine propulsion system, combining electric turbines with gas propulsion, represented the cutting edge of naval engineering. Designed with adaptive AI capable of analyzing threats and optimizing its performance in real time, it was a ship unlike any other in the fleet. The Navy's top minds had poured years of research into making the Raven Crest the future of naval warfare. Yet, here it was, stranded, its propulsion system completely dead. The mission, a routine exercise meant to simulate a series of combat scenarios with Allied fleets, was now in complete jeopardy. The ship had come to a standstill in the waters off San Diego, and the engineering team was at a loss. With the systems locked and no apparent way to troubleshoot, the AI had not only failed to fix the problem, it had made things worse. As Captain Douglas Bray sat at the command center, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders. His eyes flickered across the dimly lit room filled with flashing diagnostic screens. He had seen many problems during his years in the Navy, but nothing like this. The engineers were frantically working at their consoles, trying to reset the AI, attempting to communicate with the propulsion system, but nothing was happening. Each failed attempt only added to the sense of impending doom. The engineers' faces reflected the same exhaustion that had taken hold of the crew. There was a quiet desperation in the air. The Ravencrest's engines, which were meant to be an epitome of precision and power, had betrayed them at the most critical juncture. With each passing minute, Captain Bray felt the pressure mounting. It wasn't just the mission at stake, it was the Navy's pride. The Ravencrest was supposed to lead the next generation of naval operations, a beacon of technological advancement. If they couldn't fix this, it would be a public embarrassment, and it could cost Bray his career. "Captain, we've tried everything," one of the engineers said, his voice tinged with frustration. "The AI keeps locking the system in defense mode. It's like it doesn't even recognize the problem anymore. We're running out of options." Captain Bray stared at the screen in front of him. His eyes darted from one readout to another, trying to make sense of the gibberish that filled the diagnostics. The propulsion system was meant to analyze and correct itself. The idea was to rely on artificial intelligence for real-time adjustments, but now the ship was completely reliant on a malfunctioning AI that had, essentially, locked them out of their own ship. It was absurd. If they didn't find a way out of this, it wasn't just the mission that was lost, the Navy would have to face an embarrassing failure that would ripple through the ranks. "Call Admiral Pierce," Captain Bray ordered, a steely resolve entering his voice. "We need to escalate this." Escalation, the unlikely solution. Admiral Eleanor Pierce was known for her sharp mind and quick decision-making. Over the years, she had commanded fleets through some of the most complicated situations the Navy had ever faced. But when the call came through from Captain Bray, even she was caught off guard. "What are we dealing with?" she asked as soon as the communication was established. "Admiral, we have a complete propulsion failure on the Ravencrest," Captain Bray said. His tone was calm, but his eyes told a different story. "The AI has locked the system down, and we can't restart the engines. The engineers are at a loss. I don't think the technology is going to fix this one." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Admiral Pierce spoke again, her voice laced with concern. "Have you tried everything? I thought this ship was bulletproof," she said, her frustration clear. "We've tried everything," Bray replied. "The AI's diagnostic feedback is worthless. It's locking the system down with no clear reason why. And the engineers, they don't know what to do next." Admiral Pierce's mind was already working in overdrive. She had seen many technological failures before, but nothing of this magnitude, especially not from a ship this advanced. This was supposed to be the Navy's greatest asset, and yet here it was, helpless in the water. "I'm sending someone," she said suddenly, as if making up her mind in an instant. "I've got someone who might be able to solve this." Captain Bray's brows furrowed. He was surprised. He had expected her to go through the usual channels, escalate it up to the next level of engineers, or call in higher-ups from the Navy's tech division. But this? This was different. "Who are you sending?" he asked, unable to hide the curiosity in his voice. "Raymond Ellis," Admiral Pierce replied simply. "He's retired, but he's done this kind of thing before. Sometimes, you need someone who thinks outside the box." Raymond Ellis. The name was not one Bray had heard in years. The man was a legend in his own right, known for solving problems that no one else could, using methods that most engineers would laugh at. He had once saved an entire fleet from a similar propulsion failure using nothing more than his instincts and a few simple tools. But that had been years ago, long before the AI revolution had taken over naval engineering. Since then, he had been relegated to retirement. "Are you serious?" Bray asked, still not fully comprehending the choice. "He's retired. Do you really think he can help with this?" "He has a knack for seeing what others can't," Admiral Pierce said, her voice firm. "And right now, we need someone who can think differently. He's on his way." The arrival of Raymond Ellis the following hours felt like an eternity as Bray and the crew continued to struggle with the system. Time was running out. But then, at last, the figure that had been the subject of so many stories arrived. Raymond Ellis, carrying little more than a worn notebook and a basic wrench, stepped aboard the Ravencrest. At first, the crew couldn't believe their eyes. This was the person the Navy had called in to fix the most sophisticated ship in their fleet. The man looked almost out of place, a relic from a bygone era, standing amidst the sleek, high-tech consoles and complex machinery of the Ravencrest. He didn't look like someone who could solve the problem that had the most advanced engineers baffled. Ellis's reputation preceded him, but he didn't need any introduction. As he walked down the corridors of the Ravencrest, he exuded an air of quiet confidence. He didn't carry the latest tools or gadgets. Instead, he had a stethoscope around his neck, a simple notebook in his pocket, and a wrench that had clearly seen better days. The engineers looked at him skeptically, but Ellis wasn't fazed. He didn't waste time talking about the problems or theorizing. He went straight to the heart of the matter, the engine room. His presence was calm, deliberate, and purpose-driven. The crew watched in awe as Ellis bypassed all the high-tech diagnostic equipment they had been relying on. Instead, he placed the stethoscope against the engine casing, closing his eyes as he listened intently. The engineers, baffled, exchanged confused glances. How could someone so old-fashioned be expected to solve a problem with cutting-edge technology? But as Ellis focused on the subtle hums and vibrations, a shift seemed to occur. Something was clicking in his mind, an understanding of the ship's problems that no computer screen could show. The AI might have failed to recognize the issue, but Ellis, relying on nothing but experience, could hear the story that the engine was telling him. The air in the engine room was thick with tension as Raymond Ellis knelt beside the Ravencrest's massive propulsion system. The engineers had watched him curiously as he pulled the stethoscope from his neck and placed it gently against the casing of the ship's power unit. At first, the sound of his deliberate listening seemed odd, even out of place in this world of advanced diagnostics and artificial intelligence. But as the minutes passed and Ellis focused solely on the vibrations of the engine, something in the air began to shift. The hum of the ship's engine had a rhythm to it, a song that only someone like Ellis, with decades of experience, could understand. His brow furrowed as he listened to the faint, irregular pulse emanating from within. This wasn't just any failure. This was a system locked in a defensive state, trying to protect itself from what it believed was an external threat. But in reality, the Ravencrest had been fighting a ghost, an artificial interpretation of the problem that had caused the system to shut down in the first place. Ellis had never trusted the advanced AI systems that had taken over the Navy's operations. To him, the reliance on computers to solve everything had clouded their judgment. They had replaced human intuition and experience with algorithms that couldn't feel, couldn't hear, and certainly couldn't adapt in the same way a trained engineer could. "Captain Bray," Ellis called out without looking up. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of quiet confidence in it that demanded attention. "This ship's problem isn't as complex as everyone thinks. The AI is the one causing the issue. It's locked the system down in defense mode because it misinterpreted the failure." Captain Bray, standing behind him, could barely suppress a mixture of disbelief and hope. He had seen countless engineers try and fail, and now here was this retired, unassuming man, listening to the engine with nothing more than an old stethoscope and a worn-out notebook. Bray stepped closer, trying to process what Ellis was saying. "How do you know that?" Bray asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Ellis finally looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. The AI couldn't interpret the mis-sequenced heat-sink capacitor reset. It thought it was a deeper issue, so it initiated a lockdown to protect the systems. It didn't even know what it was dealing with. Captain Bray stared at Ellis, stunned. "So, you're saying that the AI caused the failure?" "Yes, and I'm sure of it," Ellis replied, now standing upright and gesturing to the crew working behind him. The capacitor reset wasn't sequenced properly during a system update, and the AI flagged it as a catastrophic fault. Now it's stuck in a loop, unable to process anything that doesn't match its predefined parameters. The engineers exchanged glances, some nodding, others looking confused. But the more Ellis explained, the more they started to see the logic. The AI was a powerful tool, but without the human touch to recognize the subtleties that technology missed, it had failed them. Ellis turned back to the ship's inner workings, his hands moving with confidence. "We can fix this. It's a simple hardware issue, but I'm going to need access to the system's manual reset protocol. Don't bother with the diagnostics. Those won't work. I'll need a wrench and a heatsink capacitor." As Ellis spoke, the rest of the engineering team rallied to assist him. The skeptics were beginning to fade, replaced by a growing sense of urgency as Ellis's words hit home. They had been stuck for hours, but now they had a direction. It wasn't one dictated by a sophisticated algorithm, but by decades of knowledge, gained through trial, error, and hands-on experience. Ellis knew that it was the basics that would save them. The fix Ellis worked quickly and efficiently, bypassing the technical traps that the AI had set and taking a direct, no-nonsense approach. As he began removing the malfunctioning heatsink capacitor, the room was still, save for the hum of the ship's cooling systems and the quiet clink of tools. There was something almost meditative about his movements. He didn't rush, but he didn't waste time either. Every move was deliberate, and every action was focused on getting the system back online. "Here," Ellis said, holding up the capacitor in his hand, a small but crucial piece of the puzzle. "This part is fried. We need a new one, and it needs to be inserted carefully. No sudden movements. If the system detects any shock, it might initiate another lockdown." As the team quickly replaced the faulty component with a fresh one, Ellis kept a steady watch, guiding them with quiet precision. He never once looked at the diagnostic screens or relied on the ship's computer feedback. Instead, he listened intently to the mechanical sounds of the ship and examined the subtle vibrations that had eluded everyone else. With the new capacitor in place, Ellis instructed the crew to initiate a manual restart. Slowly, he emphasized. "We need to ease the system back in. No forceful reboots. If we rush this, the AI will panic again." The team held their breath as they followed his instructions. As the systems hummed to life, the previously dead propulsion system began to respond. One by one, the diagnostic lights shifted from red to green, signaling that the ship's engines were coming back online. The AI, which had once been their greatest asset, now quietly adjusted, acknowledging the changes made by Ellis, finally understanding the real issue. Ellis stood back, watching the systems power up. It was a small victory, but one that felt monumental. The Ravencrest was back in motion. The relief that spread across the room was palpable, but Ellis wasn't about to let the engineers rest on their laurels. The work wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the systems resumed their normal function, Ellis gathered the crew around him, his voice serious. "We've fixed the problem. The ship is running again. But there's a bigger lesson here," he began, his tone firm but not harsh. "We can't rely too much on AI. If we keep building these smarter and smarter systems, we'll lose touch with what makes them work in the first place. The bones matter. You've got to remember the fundamentals. No machine can replace experience, intuition, and the ability to think for yourself." The engineers listened, a new sense of respect dawning in their eyes. They had been so focused on the cutting-edge technology, the sophisticated AI that was supposed to fix everything, that they had forgotten to rely on their own senses, the very things that had originally driven them into engineering. The tools had become the masters, and for a moment, they had forgotten that human intuition and ingenuity were irreplaceable. Ellis turned to Captain Bray, who was standing in the background, watching the engineers' reactions. "Don't let this ship ever forget that," Ellis added, his voice softening. You can't outsource your understanding to machines. Machines are there to help, not to replace. You all still have to be the ones to lead. A quiet departure with the engines back online and the crisis averted, Captain Bray and the rest of the crew stood in awe of the retired veteran who had single-handedly saved the mission. As they prepared to set the Ravencrest back on course, Bray approached Ellis, ready to thank him for his efforts. "You've done something incredible here, Ellis," Bray said, his voice filled with admiration. "I've never seen anything like it. You saved us." Ellis smiled, but there was no arrogance in his expression, only humility. "I didn't save you. I just did my job." As Bray extended his hand to offer a formal thanks, Ellis shook it, then stepped back, refusing the accolades that followed. "I don't need recognition. What matters is the work I've done, and the work you'll continue to do. Don't rely too much on AI. That's the lesson I'm leaving with you." With that, Raymond Ellis turned and walked out of the engine room, leaving behind a crew forever changed by his unconventional approach. The Ravencrest had been saved, but more importantly, its crew had learned an invaluable lesson. Never forget the power of human intuition, no matter how advanced the technology around them became. As the Ravencrest hummed back to life, Captain Bray stood on the deck, gazing out over the sea. The relief was palpable. What had seemed like an impossible situation just hours earlier had been resolved. The AI that had once been the ship's greatest asset had been shown for what it truly was, a tool, powerful but not infallible. And Raymond Ellis, the man the Navy had written off as obsolete, had been the one to bring the ship back from the brink. Bray couldn't shake the image of Ellis, the retired veteran, working in silence, bypassing the latest and greatest technologies with nothing more than his instincts and experience. The older engineer had accomplished something remarkable, something that no amount of training or fancy machinery could have predicted. He hadn't relied on the flashy diagnostics that the Navy had grown to depend on. Instead, he had listened to the engine, felt its subtle vibrations, and used his decades of hands-on knowledge to solve the problem. Bray knew that the real victory lay not just in the Ravencrest's restored systems but in the deep, quiet truth Ellis had revealed to everyone aboard the ship. The lesson of human intuition. The next day, as the ship continued its course towards the destination, Captain Bray convened a meeting with the engineering team. The mood on the ship had shifted dramatically. What had been a night filled with stress and uncertainty now buzzed with energy and renewed purpose. The engineers, who had been close to surrendering to the complexity of the malfunctioning systems, were now invigorated by what they had witnessed. Ellis's visit had been more than just a mechanical fix. It was a wake-up call to all of them. The Navy had invested so much in technology, in AI, and in the idea that machines could replace human effort and thought. But Ellis had proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that human experience, wisdom, and creativity were irreplaceable. It wasn't just about the tools, they were just extensions of the human mind. What mattered was the ability to think critically, to solve problems in ways that machines couldn't. Bray stood at the front of the room, looking out at the crew, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. Ellis didn't just fix a machine, he began. He showed us that the human element, the ability to reason, to understand beyond the data, is what makes us irreplaceable. Yes, we have the best technology in the world, but without people who understand it, who are willing to think for themselves, it's just a collection of parts. The room was silent as the engineers absorbed the lesson. It wasn't an easy pill to swallow, but it was the truth. Bray could see that the team was beginning to understand. They had been swept up in the excitement of new technologies, convinced that AI and automation could do everything. But Ellis had broken that illusion, showing them that there were limits to what technology could achieve, especially when it came to complex, real-world problems. We need to be the ones who guide this ship and its technology, Bray continued. Technology can't replace human judgment. It can help us, but it can't think for us. From here on out, we need to work together. We need to trust our instincts and our knowledge. That's how we'll truly unlock the full potential of this ship. Ellis's departure. As the meeting adjourned, the crew left with a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just a team of engineers anymore. They were a group of individuals who understood the value of their own judgment, who recognized that they had the power to guide the Ravencrest to success, with or without AI. Captain Bray, still reflecting on the meeting, made his way to the mess hall, where he found Ellis sitting alone, quietly drinking his coffee. The man didn't seek attention, didn't need accolades, and certainly didn't care for formal recognition. He had come, done his job, and now he was ready to leave. Bray sat across from him, looking at the veteran who had just changed the trajectory of their mission. "You've done something incredible here," Bray said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "Not just for the ship, but for all of us." Ellis shrugged, his weathered face breaking into a small smile. "It wasn't anything special," he said, his tone humble. "I just did what I know how to do." Bray nodded, understanding that Ellis would never seek praise. "Still, what you did. It's not just about fixing the ship, Ellis. It's about showing us the bigger picture. You reminded us that there's more to this than just systems and diagnostics. You reminded us of the human element. And for that, I'm grateful." Ellis looked at Bray for a moment, his gaze sharp yet kind. "I'm glad I could help," he said, then leaned back in his chair. "But don't get too comfortable. The moment you start relying too much on machines, they'll start relying on you less. Always remember who's in charge. The technology doesn't run the show. You do." Bray sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the words. The old man's wisdom was far greater than he had first realized. He wasn't just a relic from a bygone era, he was a beacon, a reminder of the balance between man and machine, between experience and innovation. Bray knew that Ellis had left behind a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his career. "I'll take that advice to heart," Bray said finally, standing up. "Thank you, Ellis." Ellis nodded, standing as well. He didn't offer any further words of wisdom, nor did he need to. His actions had already spoken volumes. He was the kind of person who didn't need recognition or praise. All he wanted was for the ship to run, for the crew to understand, and for the next generation of engineers to carry the lesson forward. As Bray watched him walk away, he knew that Ellis's impact would last far longer than just the few hours he had spent aboard the ship. The Ravencrest was now back on course, and its crew had been forever changed. A legacy of mentorship. As the days passed, the crew of the Ravencrest returned to normal operations. The mission continued, and the ship performed flawlessly. But Ellis's influence lingered. Captain Bray noticed a difference in the engineers. They were more deliberate in their decisions, more confident in their abilities, and more aware of the balance between technology and human judgment. The Navy had sent Ellis to solve a problem, but in the end, he had solved something much bigger. He had restored something vital, the crew's belief in themselves. By teaching them to trust their instincts, to think critically, and to never place their entire faith in machines, Ellis had ensured that the Ravencrest would not only survive this crisis but thrive in the future. And as for Ellis himself, he quietly disappeared once the mission had concluded, fading back into retirement without fanfare or ceremony. The Navy would always remember the day he saved the Ravencrest, not just with his tools, but with his wisdom. And those who had worked alongside him would carry his lessons forward, ensuring that the human element would never be lost in a world that increasingly relied on technology. The Ravencrest had regained its momentum. The mission, which had once seemed doomed, was now back on track. The ship's systems were functioning flawlessly, and the AI, which had once locked them out, now cooperated seamlessly. The crew's spirits had lifted, and their confidence in the ship's capabilities had been restored. But there was something more at play, something that no one aboard the Ravencrest could have predicted. The engineers, once overwhelmed by the complexity of their high-tech tools, began to approach their work with a new perspective. They had seen the power of technology firsthand. But they had also seen its limitations. The lesson that Raymond Ellis had imparted. The importance of human judgment, of experience, and intuition, had left an indelible mark on the team. No longer were they blind followers of diagnostics and AI systems. They were engineers once again, masters of their craft, able to think critically and solve problems from the ground up. Captain Bray had noticed the change in his crew. They no longer relied solely on their screens and AI-driven data. Instead, they had begun to ask questions, to think beyond what the computer told them. It was as if the ghost of Ellis's quiet wisdom had followed them through every step of their work, guiding them toward a deeper understanding of their role. The ripple effect of change as the Ravencrest continued its journey toward its final destination, Captain Bray found himself reflecting on the lessons learned over the past few days. He had been a man of logic, a man who trusted in systems and technology. But Ellis had shown him something fundamental. Technology, no matter how advanced, was only as effective as the people who operated it. Bray sat in his office, reviewing the mission logs and operational data. The engineers had completed their tasks with unprecedented efficiency, working in harmony with the technology. They weren't just troubleshooting, they were anticipating problems before they arose. They were once again the masters of their own ship. But even more than that, Bray saw the value in their newfound understanding. The Ravencrest wasn't just a vessel of advanced technology, it was a team of people, working together to make the most of the tools they had at their disposal. That was the true power of the ship, and Ellis had reminded them of it. As Bray sat back in his chair, he made a decision. He would take the lessons learned from Ellis and incorporate them into the Navy's broader training program. The crew would be given a new approach, one that emphasized not only technical proficiency but also the critical thinking and intuition that Ellis had shown them. He made a note to himself to initiate a new training protocol, one that would balance the reliance on AI with an emphasis on hands-on experience and human insight. The Navy's future depended on both, on the synergy between cutting-edge technology and the wisdom of those who understood its limitations. Ellis's impact beyond the Ravencrest. As the days turned into weeks, word of Ellis's success on the Ravencrest spread throughout the fleet. Engineers, officers, and sailors alike began to reconsider the way they interacted with technology. It was no longer just about pushing the latest system to its limits. It was about remembering the basics, about acknowledging that machines could only do so much. Ellis had become something of a legend in the Navy, but not for the reasons most would expect. He wasn't the typical hero, he wasn't flashy, he didn't boast of grand victories, and he certainly didn't seek fame. But in his quiet, unassuming way, he had done something far more impactful. He had changed the Navy's relationship with technology. The Navy's high command took notice of Ellis's influence, and before long, he was asked to return, but this time, not to fix a single ship. They wanted him to mentor a new generation of engineers. His approach, though unconventional, was exactly what the Navy needed. They had realized that they couldn't rely entirely on AI and automation. They needed the human touch, the intuition, experience, and judgment that no machine could replicate. Ellis agreed, but only on one condition: he would not teach from textbooks or use traditional methods. He would teach through hands-on experience, through the very act of problem-solving, using whatever tools were at hand. The Navy had no idea what it was in for. But what followed would change the way the next generation of engineers thought about technology forever. The shift in training and mindset back at the Ravencrest, the crew continued to operate with a new sense of responsibility and pride. They had not only learned to fix the ship, they had learned to think for themselves again. As Bray and his team set course for the next mission, they carried with them the lessons of Ellis. Technology was a tool, but the people who used it were the true driving force behind success. Bray organized a debriefing session with his crew. It was no longer just about what went wrong with the propulsion system. It was about how they had solved it, how they had worked together, and how they had learned to trust their instincts. For the first time, Bray saw his team as more than just a group of engineers and officers. They were thinkers, problem solvers, and innovators. During the meeting, Bray addressed the crew, his tone serious but filled with pride. We were on the verge of a disaster, he began. But we didn't let it happen. We didn't sit around waiting for someone else to fix the problem. We got our hands dirty. We trusted our judgment. And most importantly, we remembered that no machine is perfect. The machines might help us, but they'll never replace us. We need to be the ones in charge. There was a murmur of agreement among the engineers. They had seen the power of technology, yes, but they had also seen its limits. They were engineers, after all, not just operators of machines. Bray's words resonated deeply with them. They had found a new balance, a new way of thinking about their work. And that was the true victory. Ellis's final words a few weeks later. Ellis returned to the Ravencrest, but this time, he wasn't there to fix anything. Instead, he was there to offer his final piece of advice, to share the lessons he had learned over his long career. The crew had asked for a final meeting with him, a chance to hear his wisdom one last time. As Ellis stood before the engineers, he didn't give a long speech. Instead, he simply said, "I've spent my life fixing things. I've saved ships, I've solved problems, but what I've learned over the years is that you can't fix everything with tools and machines. The real work happens up here." He pointed to his head, then to his heart. "Remember to trust yourselves. Trust your instincts. Never let the machines do your thinking for you." With those simple words, Ellis walked away from the ship one final time. He had passed on everything he needed to, and now it was up to the crew to carry his lessons forward. As the Ravencrest sailed into the horizon, Captain Bray knew that Ellis's legacy would live on, not just in the Ravencrest, but in the entire fleet. The ship had been saved, but more importantly, a new mindset had been forged. The Navy would never be the same again. The Ravencrest had completed its mission successfully, and the ship now sailed smoothly toward its home port. The crisis had passed, and the advanced hybrid engine destroyer was operating flawlessly. But as Captain Douglas Bray stood on the bridge, looking out over the calm waters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted aboard the ship, and in the Navy as a whole. The Ravencrest had been saved, not just by advanced technology, but by an old man with a simple wrench, a stethoscope, and the kind of experience that no artificial intelligence could replicate. Raymond Ellis's intervention had been an unexpected turn of events. The Navy had relied so heavily on AI and cutting-edge systems that it had forgotten one critical thing: machines could not solve every problem. There were moments when human intuition and experience were irreplaceable, and it had taken Ellis, with his unconventional methods, to remind them all of that. As the ship continued its course, Bray found himself reflecting on the lessons Ellis had taught the crew. It wasn't just about fixing a malfunctioning engine or solving a technical glitch. It was about a mindset, a shift in how the Navy should approach its work. Bray knew that Ellis's impact would ripple out far beyond the Ravencrest. The aftermath, reflection and realization. Captain Bray called for a meeting with his senior engineering officers and the younger engineers who had worked with Ellis. The ship had been repaired, the mission accomplished, and the systems were all running smoothly, but Bray knew that the real work had only just begun. The team needed to reflect on what had happened, to understand the full implications of Ellis's actions, and to ensure that the lessons learned were not forgotten. As the engineers gathered in the conference room, Bray stood before them, a sense of gravity in his posture. He could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another meeting to discuss technicalities, this was a turning point in the way the Navy would operate in the future. "All right," Bray began, his voice steady, "we've all seen what happened. The Ravencrest was dead in the water, and no amount of advanced AI or diagnostic systems could fix it. It took Raymond Ellis, a retired engineer who hadn't worked with these systems in years, to show us what was missing." The room fell silent. The engineers exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others deep in thought. They knew Bray was right. Ellis's intervention had been a reminder that no matter how advanced their technology became, there were limits to what machines could understand. It was clear that they had been relying too much on the technology and not enough on their own instincts. Bray continued, Ellis didn't use any fancy tools. He didn't trust the AI. He didn't even look at the diagnostic screens. He simply listened, trusted his experience, and fixed the problem. And in doing so, he taught us something crucial. Technology is a tool, not a crutch. The senior engineers in the room shifted in their seats, absorbing the weight of Bray's words. They had grown up in a world where technology was king, where systems like the AI on the Ravencrest were designed to make everything easier, faster, and more precise. And yet, here was a man who had not only bypassed those systems but had also proven that the human mind, guided by experience and intuition, was still the most important tool in the engineer's arsenal. Bray paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. "I want us to think about what happened here," he said. "We're going to start training differently. We're going to balance our technical knowledge with the understanding that no machine, no matter how advanced, can replace our ability to think critically. This is what Ellis showed us. And this is how we're going to move forward." The younger engineers, who had been raised in the shadow of AI, were particularly struck by Bray's words. They had been taught to trust technology, to rely on data, and to let the systems make the decisions. But after witnessing Ellis's methodical, hands-on approach, they realized that they had been overlooking the power of their own minds. One of the younger engineers, a woman named Lydia, spoke up. "I've always trusted the AI. It's been our go-to for everything. But seeing how Ellis just bypassed it, it's like he wasn't afraid to challenge it. We've never been taught to do that." Bray smiled at Lydia's insight. "Exactly. Technology should empower us, not limit us. We can't be afraid to question it, to challenge it when it doesn't make sense. That's the kind of engineer we need to be, someone who can balance the tools with the knowledge and judgment we bring to the table." Lydia nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. "I see that now. We've been relying too much on the systems, thinking they can solve everything. But there's no substitute for our own judgment." A change in training, introducing a new approach. Bray's words set the tone for a radical shift in how the Navy would train its engineers and officers. The following week saw a change in the curriculum. The engineers, both new and seasoned, began a series of hands-on workshops where they practiced problem-solving without relying on the AI systems that had become so ingrained in their daily work. They were encouraged to listen to the engines, to feel the vibrations, to understand the machines in ways that didn't involve screens or diagnostics. The goal was to develop their intuition, to teach them to trust their senses, their training, and their experience. Admiral Pierce, who had been following the developments closely, fully supported the new approach. She had seen firsthand the impact of Ellis's unconventional methods, and she knew that this change was not just necessary but essential. The Navy had spent decades integrating AI into every aspect of its operations, but it had forgotten a fundamental truth: technology was only as good as the people who understood it. The Navy needed engineers who could think critically, adapt to new situations, and, most importantly, solve problems when the technology failed. The Navy began investing in mentorship programs, where seasoned engineers like Ellis could pass down their knowledge to the next generation. These mentorships weren't just about teaching technical skills, they were about cultivating a mindset. Engineers would learn to trust their instincts, to work through problems step by step, and to never assume that the technology had all the answers. Ellis's legacy, the quiet mentor Raymond Ellis, meanwhile, remained a quiet presence on the Ravencrest. His work was done, and now he had slipped back into retirement, never seeking recognition or accolades. But his legacy was alive and well aboard the ship and in the hearts and minds of those he had mentored. Ellis didn't need medals or titles. His greatest contribution was the shift in mindset he had instilled in the engineers. In the months that followed, Captain Bray saw the results of Ellis's intervention. The younger engineers, once dependent on AI, were now tackling problems with a confidence that came from within. They approached challenges not with blind faith in the systems, but with a deeper understanding of the machines and a readiness to trust their own judgment. They were becoming the kind of engineers the Navy needed, not just operators of technology, but critical thinkers who could adapt to any situation. Ellis's final words before leaving the Ravencrest for the last time. Ellis sat down with Captain Bray one last time. The ship was docked, the mission was complete, and Ellis was preparing to return to the quiet life he had left behind. Bray, still deeply grateful for the lessons Ellis had imparted, invited him to a final conversation. "You've done more than just fix a ship, Ellis," Bray said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You've changed the way we think. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." Ellis smiled, a small, humble smile that spoke volumes. "I didn't do anything special, Bray. I just did my job. You're the one who's going to carry it forward. It's up to you and your crew to keep what I taught you alive. Don't let the machines take over." Bray nodded, understanding the weight of Ellis's words. "I won't forget. And neither will the crew." With that, Ellis turned to leave. His mission was complete. But in the hearts of the crew, the lessons he had taught them would last forever. The Navy was never going to be the same. In life, we often face challenges that seem insurmountable, especially when we lean too heavily on external tools and systems that promise to solve all our problems. The story of Raymond Ellis and the Ravencrest serves as a powerful reminder of the value of human intuition and experience. While technology has undoubtedly advanced and transformed the way we live, it's crucial to remember that no machine can replace the wisdom that comes from years of hard work and learning. When faced with overwhelming problems, it's easy to feel dependent on the tools around us, but true strength comes from the ability to adapt, think critically, and rely on our own abilities. Just as Ellis saved the Ravencrest not by relying on AI, but by listening, observing, and applying knowledge learned over a lifetime, we, too, must remember to trust ourselves. Technology will always have its place, but it is our capacity for insight, creativity, and experience that truly shapes the outcomes of our lives. In moments of uncertainty, we must pause, reflect, and listen to the quiet wisdom within, for that is what will lead us to the solutions we seek. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a chance to be inspired.